For everyone here and for people online as well. Hello everyone, I'm Simon Milner. I work for Facebook and Facebook's Policy Director for the UK, Middle East and Africa. I organised this panel with Susie Hargreaves from the IWS. Do you want to stand up and wave? We did notice, Susie and I, despite our best attempts to get a better balanced panel on the gender front, we failed. Nonetheless, Susie still volunteered me to chair. So that's why I'm here. Really pleased to be here. And the plan for today is to, fairly provocative title for the session, but there is no doubt about it that apropos one of the things that Malcolm raised this morning in the session, one of the things that we definitely see in the international debate is people looking at the UK and say, well, look, you've decided you are going to control the internet in order to protect children. We also think it's valid for us to control the internet to protect the things we care about. So that's often the context in which the child protection issues come to the fore. And what we wanted to do in this panel was, rather than to debate that specifically, is to really understand how the UK is doing on the child protection agenda in terms of online child protection, and try to relate it to some of the wider issues around internet governance. What we're going to do first is look at some evidence. So shortly I'll introduce a couple of people on the panel who are going to talk about the evidence around safety. What do young people, their parents, teachers and others care about? What are they concerned about, and how well equipped are they to deal with it? And also then, so that's the first part of the presentations, if you like. Then we're going to turn specifically to internet filtering, which is arguably the most high-profile intervention we've seen in the safety arena in the last year in the UK. Lots of media and political commentary on that. And what we want to hear is a couple of different views around what's actually happening in terms of the main 4 ISPs in the UK. And obviously, it's hugely interesting in the context of internet governance. So let me introduce the panel. On my right, we've got Will Gardner from Childnet. To his right is Jeremy Olivier from OfCOM. And we're actually going to hear from Jeremy twice in the introduction. First of all, to talk about evidence, and secondly, to talk about what the work that OfCOM are doing around the internet filters implementation work that the ISPs are doing. And then we'll hear from, we'll also hear from Dan Butler from Virgin Media on my left, and to his left, Pete Bradwell. So those of you in the know will know that's not Jim Killock. Jim unfortunately couldn't join us, but Pete's a very able substitute for him. So that's what we're going to do to kick off. There is only a relatively small number of us here, which means we need you guys to be engaged in order to make this work as a discussion. And also, Laura, obviously, if there are people who are joining us via the web, then it'd be great for them to also contribute, and I hope they can hear as well. Panelists, if you can make sure you speak into the microphone so that the people on the web can hear us. And I'm sure you'll give us a shout if you think we're not doing that well enough. Okay, Will, over to you.
Thank you, Simon.
That
might be, yeah. I guess I'll start off with the IGF connection, and I don't do this to gloat, but in Bali, we took a group of young people and spoke to a very packed workshop with many people in it, where we had we took a group of young people to the IGF to really have their say. It's a big meeting talking about the future of the internet and lots of different stakeholders there, multi-stakeholder discussion. We wanted to make sure that children were represented at that meeting, and in order to, in their preparations for the meeting, the young people did a survey which they put up online that was answered by people in many countries across the world. More than 60 countries people responded on online anonymity. And it was actually, coincidentally, a very topical time because it was in the summer and everybody was talking about anonymous services online in terms of child protection. And the results are really interesting. And there was an element of a large number of people were using these services, and they used them for particular reasons. But one of the reasons that they were using them for was the fact that it enabled them to keep their personal information safe. So there was that kind of positive angle to it. There was a recognition that there was more cyberbullying. People were nastier on anonymous services online. But also recognition of the potential positives, that it was easier to pay people a compliment using an anonymous service, for example, or it's easier to talk about things which are difficult to talk about in an online way or in a way that you can be identified. So that was an interesting discussion, and it was a really, I think, a valuable contribution to have young people's voice there. I'll just talk about two other things. One is a big piece of research we did last year called the Have Your Say survey, which we put it up online. We had 24,000 children reply to it, 12,000 primary school children, 12,000 secondary school children. And in the questionnaire, it was designed to help young people identify what their top online rights and responsibilities were. And in the results, we had 7 to 11-year-olds and 11 to 19-year-olds, and all of them were talking about their experience of online risk. And so we could see that the 4 C's, if you like, of online risk, of content, contact, commerce, and conduct, if you like, were experienced by both age groups, primary school children and by secondary age children. And there were things online which did stop them enjoying their time on the internet. And the top 2 were mean comments and cyberbullying, and the second one was content. These are the issues that they felt very keenly about. That has to be put in the context of the large number of people, young people that were really enjoying this technology. We had a stat of 2 in 5 young people were web creators, had created an app, a game, or a website, which I think is an encouraging figure. And the vast majority of people were enjoying their time on the internet. We were specifically asking about the things which had bothered them. Then last Safer Internet Day, we invited some young people down to Microsoft's offices for Safer Internet Day to talk about what they felt their top right and responsibility was. And we had secondary age children talking about, we want reporting to be more prominent on social networking. We want help with that. And I share this story a lot, so some of you are going to have to forgive me, but there was a primary age boy who, when he took the microphone, he had been studying the civil rights movement just the week before, and he took the microphone. I have a dream. I have a dream that I could use, me and my friends can use the internet without the fear of being bullied online. And it was a very powerful moment, and it helped kind of sharpen all the data that we had to a very sharp edge to really, I think, pierce the ears of everybody who was in the room. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was a fantastic moment, but it really did make clear that this is an important issue for children of all ages, primary school and secondary age children, and they wanted support and education in that space. And in amongst all that data was the fact that parents had a key role to play, as Simon just mentioned in the introduction. We had 7 to 14-year-olds saying that the first people they returned to for support were parents. At the age of 14, friends overtook parents, but parents were number 2, and in fact were not far behind all the way through to the age of 19, and that was a crucial moment. With Safer Internet Day this year, which hopefully all of you were aware of, that took place on Tuesday, there was a lot of noise. We had fantastic coverage, and a large number of organizations, public sector, private sector, schools, voluntary sector, all supporting the day to help try and get this important message out. We put some stats out about parental engagement, and we had 68% of parents saying that they had had a conversation about internet safety. But we tried to go one step further to see, well, what did that conversation actually consist of? And we had just under 50% of parents had spoken about stranger danger online with their children. We had just over a third saying we spoke to our children about what they should do if they come across something which makes them feel uncomfortable. And we had just 20% talking about reporting and how to report. So it looked like there were elements within the conversation that we need to make sure that we are filling for, because parents provide this vital supportive role, and we need to be equipping them with the ability to have the conversations, because we see it's education which is the key. But as part of that, the tools are there, and we'll hear about filtering in a moment, but also about reporting. We need education around the tools to make that effective.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Jeremy, can you give us an insight from OfCOM's perspective about the evidence?
Yes. I wanted to start, though, by just drawing attention to the title, which, as Simon said, is mildly contentious. UK setting the standards for online child protection or going over the top. And Simon may well feel that the UK is going over the top in relation to the multiple expectations that we are placing on Facebook. Nonetheless, and even though you could argue
independently chaired,
even though it was a title originated by Facebook, I think it's really important. And I was pleased to hear it being recognised by Ed Vaizey as well this morning, that any intervention in media and communication sector intended to secure, increase protection for children, or indeed almost certainly almost any public policy goal will have risks as well as benefits in terms of the outcome, in terms of the public policy objective. You see, and we know this incredibly well from OfCOM because it's part of what we do, from the most trivial, although I would say a kind of nonetheless very impactful rules that we enforce around the watershed. Why is the watershed 9 o'clock? Because putting it at 9 o'clock instead of at 6 o'clock strikes an appropriate balance between ensuring that there's a space when children can view with security, and that there's a space for adults to access programming that's exclusively intended for adults. And in fact, these kinds of trade-offs are endemic throughout the regulation of the media sector. And the second kind of lesson that I want to make reference to from the regulation of broadcast media is that in some ways, technology actually increases choices, increases the options that policymakers and regulators have to strike an appropriate balance. Thinking about the watershed specifically, there's a difference between the rules that apply to free-to-air channels and those that apply to channels which are broadcasting films and can have a PIN control mechanism in place. They're allowed, those channels with PIN control mechanisms, to broadcast stronger material earlier in the day. They can effectively break the watershed because they've got another kind of framework in place. But for all of these, the critical point is that any intervention, whether voluntary, whether statutory one, will have trade-offs, and the only way that we can make an informed judgment about the trade-offs is with the kind of research that OfCOM does to inform the debate, and the kind of research which we've just been hearing about from Will. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a publication we just did on request of DCMS, looking explicitly, specific, not explicitly, that's an inappropriate term, looking directly at parents' confidence, and children's own experience of risk on the internet. And the first thing to say is it's an incredibly rich and complex space. As Will said, you've got the 4 different types of risk: contact, conduct, commercial, actually, we didn't cover that, and content. You've got the different ways that children may have access to educative media, and the different ways that parents have to help secure their children's safety, really radically different across the use of technical tools, right through to one-to-one engagement with the child in the form of kind of talking or imposition of rules or supervision. And it's really important, therefore, that we have a properly informed understanding of all of these issues as we make decisions or debate the different kinds of interventions which may be introduced, including those which I think we're going to talk about shortly in the form of in the form of filtering. So I'll just do very quickly, in a super quick summary of our conclusions. We find that there's lots of good news and there is some bad news as well. I think a particularly good illustration of that at the most macro level is the fact that we found across 3 core ways that children undertake to protect, parents take to undertake protection of their children, which are supervision or rules about supervision, which are regular engagement about online safety and risks, and which are the use of technical tools, including ISP filtering, but also safe search on Google or YouTube, the other kind of platforms that provide it. That around 85% of parents in the UK say they take at least one, and most undertake more than one of these ways of securing their children's.
Mind just repeating the ways, those categories?
Shall I better read them out? No. It's in the report, but essentially it's using technical tools,
yep.
Talking regularly, i.e. monthly or more frequently,
yep.
and supervising or having rules about supervision. Rules about supervision essentially means you can't look at the internet unless you're in the same room as me.
Right.
I sit with you when you're watching the internet, obviously more relevant, say, for younger children. Those are the three categories. Okay. And what's interesting about that top-level statistic is that it's a really good score, and some people would say, legitimately also, 15% is a hell of a lot of children. And this is the kind of information we need in order to be able to kind of make a proper a proper judgment about the adequacy of our current approaches and about the necessity or appropriateness of any approaches that we make in future. Before I stop, is that enough time? Before I stop, I just want to do a couple more statistics.
A couple more stats, and then we'll come on to
a couple more. I think two which I think are interesting and are encouraging in context of the current environment are the way that children and parents' attitudes and experience has changed over time. Because some of the things that we ask about the internet, we've been asking regularly for many years. On the parent side, looking at their concerns about internet stuff, what we find is over the last 3 years, the proportion who care or are concerned about the exposure of their children to cyberbullying has gone down from 29 to 24%, and that's the top concern, worth noting. The proportion who are concerned about their children being in contact with potentially malicious or difficult individuals, it has gone down from 25 to 19%. And the proportion who are concerned about the risk their children face from being exposed to potentially harmful media, that's the content risk, has gone down from 26 to 16%. Now, you could say these are still material concerns. These are still issues which merit kind of policy attention and which merit our consideration of further measures, of consideration as to whether or not we are over the top or whether or not there's further to go. On the children's side, a couple of just a bad statistic or a statistic which says we've still got a big journey to go on is that 8% of them say they've experienced, 4% of 8 to 11 and 8% of 12 to 15 report being bullied online in the last year. That's a lot of children. That's a lot of children. It's clearly a significant risk. At the same time, if you look at the experience of children engaging with media, which they say which was too old for them, or which makes them sad or frightened or embarrassed, you can see a fairly steady decline in the levels of that experience in relation to the internet for both 8 to 11s and 12 to 15s. It's gone down from about 25% a couple of years ago to 15%, and for 12 to 15 from 15 to 10%. Another really important piece of contextual information as we think about regulation of the internet and compare the internet to other media spaces is the fact that in each of the last 3 years, a materially, although perhaps not tremendously significant, the larger proportion of children say they've seen something which disturbed them on telly than on the internet. And that should tell us something about where we are potentially in the journey towards getting the right level of kind of regulation and control of the internet and the right level of protection of children. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think it'd be great to come back to that all of your evidence, particularly that last one around comparing television or online. So I've not focused on that stat before. I've not heard it. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Okay, we're now going to turn to this very specific issue of filtering, and we've got Dan Butler here from Virgin Media, who's going to talk about his company's approach to this issue, and I guess where they're at on the internet filtering journey, if that's an appropriate metaphor.
Yeah, so actually, we're actually the naughty boys in the ISP room, because we are yet to launch our filtering, our whole home filtering product. But thankfully, Sky and BT are making all of the mistakes so that we don't have to. So when we do launch our product, it will definitely learn. I'm sure it will learn from those. I think Jeremy kind of sets us in very well in saying that actually the UK, is quite a balanced contribution. The UK is in a decent place when it comes to filtering. The ISPs are all committed to the cause of creating a online environment that is safe for children, that children can get the best out of. And then actually there are decently high levels of engagement with the issue of online safety, but also specifically of filtering and parental controls. I think OfCOM's research also said that about 6 in 10 parents were taking some kind of, introducing some kind of parental control, whether that's Google controls or YouTube controls or our own software controls that the ISPs are delivering. I think in terms of, answering the question, what are ISPs bring to the table? The key thing that I think guides each of the four ISPs' approach to filtering is first and foremost giving parents the choice. The approach that we've taken with filtering in the UK is active choice, as everyone knows, and I think that is reflective of what the UK public expect in terms of where responsibility lies for managing content on the internet. We did some polling during the course of last year when we were having extensive debates with government about where the lines of responsibility should lie, and 86% of our customers said that they see it as their parents' responsibility above government, above ISPs, above other organisations to make judgments about what content should be accessible in the home. And it's that has, I guess, given us the ground to argue to government that actually choice should lie with the parent and not be taken out of the household. As well as giving them a choice, we are keen to make that choice as transparent, as easy, as accessible as possible to parents. So we've committed for new customers to delivering one-click filtering. That means that there will be a pre-tick. Some people in the child protection debate like to present pre-ticking as default filtering. They are not the same. They are very different. Pre-ticking is a way of allowing parents the simplest way possible to make the decision, but it in no way makes the decision for them. Parents have to confirm that choice before filters are put in place. Filtering will not be in place before the choice is taken. Again, we prioritize the choice of parents. We're also conscious that there's concern around who makes the decision about filtering, and so we have robust age verification processes in place, and I think you'll find across the four ISPs that they will be consistent. We'll not only require the account holder to log in before they make a decision about where to set parental controls, but any time that the level of filtering is changed or adapted, they will get an email confirming the change to decision to ensure that the account holder always has sight of what level of filtering is in their home in case kids get hold of the passwords. I'm conscious that I'm sitting next to the Open Rights Group and I don't want to, I know where the debate is going to go next, so I'll preempt that. I'll preempt that by saying...
Oh, Pete. You're not going to give Pete speech for him.
I'm going to preempt it by saying that clearly overblocking is a concern, that filters are fallible. Filters are not a panacea, and they will not get it right 100% of the time. What we're committed to doing as an ISP is ensuring that we have the processes in place that allow organizations that are concerned that they might be subject to wrongful blocking to get in touch with us in a speedy and timely manner, and we can correct those decisions where that's needed, and we have the processes to tailor the product to ensure that certain legitimate sites are whitelisted. I think I wouldn't want to overblow the concerns of the likelihood of overblocking. I think it will happen. It has already happened to the products that are in the market. Virgin Media is going to be no different. There are difficult judgments to make in certain areas of internet content, and it's pretty likely that there will be issues faced by all four ISPs products on an ongoing basis. But what's important is that we have the processes in place to address those, and that we have a sensible debate about how big a concern overblocking should be. But just to finish on a point that I think will be in line with what Peter says, filters are not, as I say, a panacea. They're a technology solution, and technology solutions are prone to error, and they are circumventable by determined users. And the parental controls that all of the ISPs are introducing are not meant to, or not intended to, prevent the most determined users from accessing content, because they will be able to get around those filters. It's meant to ensure that kids don't stumble across content that's inappropriate for them. That being said, the ISPs are committed to not only introducing filters, but also addressing what we see as the real gap in terms of parents' ability to tackle online harm, and that is their education and awareness and their ability to access resources that provide them with good advice. I think in the OfCOM research, I think there was some research, I think, on parents' access to advice, and there was a stat saying that less than 1 in 20 parents were getting access to good internet advice from NGOs, charities, and people like Will Gardner.
And Will Gardner.
And people like Will Gardner, people like Childnet, which is for me the real gap, because it's Childnet and it's the NSPCC and it's Parents Zone that have already done the hard yards in terms of what good, credible advice to parents in terms of digital parenting looks like. We should utilize that and ensure that parents get access to it. And so alongside introducing filters, each of the 4 ISPs are committed to a £25 million online safety campaign that will help, hopefully, increase parents' visibility and access to the existing very good resources that are already out there.
Dan, thank you very much. I would imagine people are going to have some questions about what's pre-ticked in the Virgin Media system. When's it going to happen? And maybe some more questions about, I think it's called Internet Matters, isn't it? Or has it changed its name, your campaign?
Oh, it's called Internet Matters, but Alex Bertos from TalkTalk might kill me for telling me that. So I didn't.
I was like whining about Alex, that's fine.
This isn't going live or anything, is it?
No, yeah. This is an open forum that you know. Okay, let's turn to Pete to talk about internet filtering as well, and to give the perspective of the Open Rights Group.
Sure, thanks very much. My speech will be about 45 seconds shorter now, because you said about 45 seconds, I think. But, I think, thanks very much for inviting us along. We've worked on this now, I've worked on this for about 2.5, 3 years on internet filtering. We started looking at mobile filters around then. I think looking at the nature of the debate that we've got in the UK at the moment, I think on the one hand, the good story is that we are collectively very focused on, as well as all the good things that the internet and new technology bring for young people, lots of the very serious problems, issues, challenges that young people face when they use those things, whether it's bullying or other sorts of pressures that they face. And I think, as Jeremy said, the way that to approach those is to look at the best, most rigorous research insights that's around how young people experience those issues, what sort of options are available. And another part of that good news story is the sort of work that Will and OfCOM, academics like Sonia Livingston and Andy Phippen do to help inform that debate and tell us what works, what doesn't work, and more, as importantly, how young people themselves experience all these different issues. And they are all very different, all the problems they face. I think the focus of this question, and the focus of what I'm going to talk about, is the confidence that we have in the policymakers to approach that question in that way, by looking at the evidence, talking calmly and rationally about what the options are, and coming to the best possible decisions about how to address all the different problems that young people face. So I guess my sort of the thing that frustrates us most, I guess, is the way is that approach from the government. And I think, from my perspective, certainly the things that the Prime Minister has said over the past year, that DCMS have done, and that most sort of publicly, Claire Perry, who's the advisor to the government on some of these issues, have been fairly unhelpful. They've displayed a fairly superficial approach to some of these very difficult questions, and they've been unnecessarily divisive as well. And I don't think that's led to the best possible decisions being taken about how to implement filters. I think too often the approach from the policymakers has been driven by expediency and a desire to look good. It's been driven by an interest in looking to be seen as proactive and like they're doing something, engaging with the issues, rather than a desire to really get their hands dirty with what the evidence says is the best approach. I think the two reasons we care about that is, firstly, it takes attention and effort and resources away from some of the more effective and meaningful solutions that are available to all the diverse issues. And secondly, it tends to lead to a brushing past of some of the problems with the implementation of, specifically in this example, filtering. And it leads to a sort of shoot first, ask questions later approach to things that and there are some very problematic issues with the implementation of filters that aren't trivial and can't just be sort of figured out as small details later. So I guess I got a few examples from the filtering case of where I think over the past 8 or 9 months in particular the government have been poor in this area. I think they've tended to run with and amplify the very, very emotive story at the heart of this, which is about a concern for children's access to harmful material, and they've tended to just drain it of complexity and drain it of nuance and detail, and as I say, reduce it to effectively a sort of referendum on whether we care about children or not, which is not particularly helpful in this debate. I think as sort of specific examples, I think if you look to some of the letters that DCMS sent to internet companies last year inviting them to the summit, those letters displayed a really impressive confusion and conflation of lots of different issues and different types of content, lumped them all together and said, you're intermediaries, surely you can do something about this. And as much as that was not an official policy document, I think it betrayed some confused thinking at least about how to approach some very, very different issues with content online and young people's access to them or experiences of their problems. I think likewise, if you look to the letter that was sent to internet service providers ahead of a speech by the Prime Minister, effectively said, could you please amend how you're planning on implementing internet filters because the Prime Minister wants to make a speech soon. I think that reveals an interesting interventionist industrial policy and isn't necessarily the best way to approach asking or talking with ISPs about how to implement some fairly serious interventions. Claire Perry has been incredibly dismissive of the concerns about overblocking. I won't repeat some of the language she used, but it was a load of something at one stage. She said,
"It's cock." She said,
"It's cock." Thank you. You really could do my teacher. And she said she dismissed most of the evidence as anecdotal, and I think that's indicative of how they've approached this issue generally.
Cock. A load of cock.
Yes.
Oh, really? Where?
She said that
Can't have been.
that building.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it wasn't like reported because the filter blocked it.
We popped it on our blog just in case nobody's heard it. And I think sort of one of the most problematic statements that was symptomatic of this approach was when the Prime Minister said in his sort of speech announcing and sort of confirming his policy was, we want one click to protect the whole family. And I think regardless of what your position on filters, that's a fairly irresponsible thing to be saying in your sort of leading comment about the implementation of filters, because he knows and we know that there are issues with implementing and turning on filters that mean if you encourage parents to turn them on and ignore it, that is a problem. As Dan said, circumvention is not difficult. They under and overblock, and all sorts of problems with the implementation that mean it's misleading and unhelpful to take that line. And I also think it undermines the claim that nobody has said that filters are a silver bullet, because the Prime Minister effectively said that they're a silver bullet in his speech about this, which wasn't helpful. I'm sort of running over time, so I'll wrap up. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there's going to be plenty of time.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think the problem is grasping the moral purpose behind internet policy. And I think if we're looking at the standards that the UK is setting in international policy context, for policymakers to take the volume and the strength of their moral convictions as effectively sufficient as an internet policy is problematic in an internet context. And to the extent that undermines the focus on lots and lots of really important details and lots of details about very different issues, that's a real problem. And as I say, it's not a referendum about whether we care for children. We're not saying no filters and no restrictions on children's access. Our worry is about the approach that policymakers have taken to what is a very tricky and complex issue.
Pete, thank you very much. A very good balance there between the two of you in terms of some of the issues here. So final contribution, actually, I'm going to turn back to Jeremy. What's probably little known is the fact that OfCOM are going to be doing some work about the implementation of filters, and I thought it would be helpful to hear from Jeremy before we get into the wider discussion about what they are going to be doing and what we can expect from OfCOM in the area of filtering.
I hope Dan knows. Yeah, I'm meeting to talk about it. So yes, as I think is entirely appropriate, DCMS has asked OfCOM to have a look at ISP's implementation of content filtering. We are going to do so, and there's a couple of really important points to make about what it is exactly that we're going to be doing. The first and perhaps one of the most interesting points is that we're not going to be checking whether or not there's over or under blocking. We don't think that's a practical or appropriate task for us to undertake. But there are a lot of questions which relate, I think, to some of the points Peter has raised, and indeed which Dan has already announced he is addressing, around the risks associated with filtering services that we are going to hope to engage with and allow or can facilitate a proper debate about. Among those, I think the one that we've just talked about, filtering transparency, is particularly important. So the things that we're going to ask the ISPs who have implemented filters are going to tell us about will include what exactly their procedures are for handling reports and over and under blocking, what kind of frameworks they use to reach judgments about the consistency of the blocking decisions which they are implementing, even if they're provided by third parties, I believe in the main they will be, and the extent to it, and we're also going to be asking about whether or not they will be transparent about the levels of reports, complaints and decisions that they take, just as OfCOM publishes every couple of weeks a set of reports about the complaints we received and the conclusions we have reached about potential breaches of editorial standards. We would like to see the way that filters work to be transparent and the procedures for addressing the risks to be transparent, because that will make them better. That will allow us, in principle, to grasp the benefits which is created by having another very powerful option for parents in their armory of rules, education, and kind of technical tools, while seeking to manage the legitimate concerns that have been raised by people commenting on the implementation of filtering. It's worth noting, actually, that in some ways, I would say the ISP's approach and the fact that it's now a UK implementation with the ability offered UK parents and, for that matter, kind of commentators to ask questions and to have a directly UK-focused framework for considering over and under blocking breaches is actually an incredibly good one, because the fact is, before it was Symantec or McAfee, and I don't think they really had a procedure soliciting input from parents in the UK about the consistency of their filtering products with the expectation of the parents who are using those products. So to some extent, it's an opportunity for us to make a filtering solution, as long as we do it right, which is better than the one that's already on the table.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Well, lots of content there. Laura, do we have a mic? On the sides of this room, we could probably all shout, although that's mainly for people on the web as well, so they're here, isn't it? We'd welcome your questions for the panel, points of clarification, but most of all, we want to debate. So who'd like to kick us off in terms of their perspectives on any of the issues that we've discussed, both in terms of UK specific, but also how it relates to the global discussion around internet governance?
Can I make a last point, which is in relation to the question we've asked ISPs? They haven't necessarily agreed to answer them all. This is not a promise that we're going to tell all this stuff. This is a discussion we're having with ISPs about what they'd like to tell us and what we can tell government and the wider policy community.
Okay.
Can I add one other thing that's consistent with our experience of asking very similar questions to mobile networks?
Okay. Let's ask the other people in the room for their questions and comments and observations, and you guys are going to have plenty of time to talk again, but I think it's time we heard from others. So who's going to kick us off? Please. Right, okay, that's funny. Can you, particularly for the sake of the panelists and those on the web, tell us who you are and the organisation you represent?
Okay, David Abrahams from Nominet, and I'll ask a devil's advocate question to get us going, which is, the Open Rights Group has been very active in pointing out the problems of overblocking, and it's difficult to disagree with your characterization of some of the problems of the political debate around this. However, is this a situation that the industry has created for itself by not acting fast enough? not doing this itself fast enough to protect or to offer the service to customers. And essentially, the ISP community have only moved on this once that political pressure became significant.
Let's just see if we've got other questions before we come to David's question. Any other questions? It could be quite good to get a group of questions that we might get the discussion going on. Okay.
Ablash Nair from Northumbria University, Newcastle. In terms of blocking adult pornographic sites, what level of transparency do you envisage? So ISPs block a set number of sites. Would the public be able to see what specific sites are blocked?
Okay, thanks. It's Abash, isn't it?
Ablash.
Yeah. Thank you, Abash. One more, then we go. Yeah.
My name's Richard Allen. I work for BSkyB. I was actually the technical lead of implementing Sky Broadband Shield for Sky. So I've been involved for about 18 months in this. So
the other Richard Allen.
There's another Richard Allen. Process here, apparently. I wanted to ask a question back to the original point here: is the UK setting standards for child protection online? I can only talk from a technical level. I'm not talking on behalf of BSkyB. I just happen to work for them. Over the last 18 months, I've been in a lot of contact with other governments around the world, like the Australian government. A lot of ISPs in the States have been in contact voluntarily with myself and a few other people in the environment I work in within Sky to ask us about our implementation of Sky Broadband Shield, or the filtering product we have. And I kind of think, from my point of view, I think that we really are taking the lead as a sort of a country globally on what we do with it as well. It's phenomenal. A lot of countries use those feeds. I kind of want to think what your opinions were around how we are on our implementation, and whether you think other nations will voluntarily do it, as in ISPs will voluntarily do it, or whether you think other governments, like the Australian government, sounds like they're going to do it, are going to drive forward legislation or voluntary ISP agreements similar to the UK.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard. I'm actually going to ask Will, just to comment on that final point. It'd be interesting to know, Will, whether you similarly have had queries from other, I mean, you're Childnet International,
Yes.
and there are lots of other safety organisations in different countries. You're part of the InSafe network. How much interest have you had from that community about what's going on in the UK, particularly around filtering?
I think Australia are a good example, because they've had some quite bold policies in this area already. You know, they've had some co-regulatory prospects with on the topic of filtering, and that's interesting. They're looking at what was going on here. We are the UK Safer Internet Centre, and there are safer internet centres across the EU, and we talk about the education awareness side of things, but it also strays onto the policy side. And I know when we get together at a European level, the active choice model, which we really support, and the active choice plus, which has now become, depending which direction you're talking about it, we really approve of the idea of giving parents a choice and giving them a recommendation for what they want to use. And we see the challenges now in trying to inform the users to make a really good choice. And that's work that the ISPs have to do, but we need to work together to try and achieve that. That doesn't always go down so well, depending across the spectrum of European countries, just given the nature of how they approach this subject around freedom of expression or industry responsibility.
I just jump in on that point and make a slightly political point. I'm here representing Virgin Media, but Virgin Media is now part of a bigger group of cable operators called Liberty Global. And so over the past year, I've observed how the debate is playing out in different, primarily European countries. I would just say that whether it's deliberate or not, the conflation in the UK of what ISPs are doing with default filtering of the internet is having ramifications for how these things are discussed in other countries, and leading and lending power to the elbow of campaigns that seek to introduce default filtering in various international territories. And I find myself having to constantly state that what is happening in the UK is not default filtering. It is premised on the parent having the choice about what is right for their own household. So I would say that internationally, we're actually through conflation sending some pretty dangerous messages out to the rest of the world about what approaches they should take.
Thanks. Why don't we cover this issue, then we'll come on back to Abash's and David's. Pete, do you want to comment on this issue about the international perspectives and what's happening in the UK?
Yeah, I think the UK is certainly probably ahead in terms of getting things implemented. I guess I could probably loop into the question asked first as well after this, but I think it provides an opportunity for other jurisdictions to learn from what's happened here. I think there are some good things. There are some problematic things. It's not a simple story. Certainly, with active choice is something we supported. We don't like pre-tick boxes as much, but again, at this stage, you're not dealing in sort of pitch battles about things. It's sort of a fairly nuanced issue. I think our major concerns that we hope people internationally could learn from would be about transparent processes for reporting mistakes. The sorts of things we've been able to learn from mobile networks that we're now seeing on ISPs as well, about making sure if I run a website, I can say, am I blocked? I can find out, am I blocked on these ISPs? Who can I talk to get it fixed, and how quickly will that happen? I guess coming back to the sort of pressure that's been applied and whether that's been helpful in pushing the industry where they should have been anyway, I don't think it's necessarily the case that you have to ignore getting something right and doing it quickly. I don't think adding pressure from the government required them to not think about how to do things properly. They could have said, you need to do these things and let's talk about some of the problems and issues with them, instead of saying you need to do these things. And then effectively, because they're saying it's the industry implementing this, they've effectively disowned responsibility for any of the problems. That's what they keep on saying. We're not doing it. The ISPs are implementing our push for them to offer these things. They could have done both. They could have said, we're policymakers, we have a responsibility for how people implement the things that we're demanding. Let's look at those issues in detail and thoughtfully. But I don't know, for some reason that didn't happen.
Okay, let's take Jeremy's view about this international perspective. It'd be good to hear what you're part of the European regulatory. What's it called again? The European body, BEREC. You're part of BEREC. What kind of interest has there been from other regulators around?
Not BEREC, which is primarily telecommunications, exclusively telecommunications. So it's linked in some way to this question, but not directly related, because in most other European countries, the standards regulator and the telecommunications regulator are separate institutions. What I will say is there has been a lot of interest, but it's primarily been from the kind of constituencies who are engaged in child protection issues or in issues, rather than being a telecommunications regulatory issue. And although people have come and talked to us, there isn't actually a lot we can say other than that we publish research on the legitimacy of these different tools and the kind of broader context in which child protection is discussed, but can't advise in detail on what ISPs are actually up to. What I would kind of flag, and this is a kind of slightly tangential point, but it will be of interest to some in the space, is that the question of the extent to which ISPs are entitled or allowed even to manage traffic, and manage traffic includes potentially controlling access to certain services, is, as many of you will know, a very live one as part of the debate about net neutrality, and that the current discussion in Europe about the potential new telecommunications regulation does directly intersect with this issue. Some versions of potential legislation would appear potentially to have restricted ISPs' right to offer even user-controlled blocking services, although that looks very unlikely now to be in the final text. So the answer is not directly as a telecoms regulator, or as a regulator, peripherally on both of those. Okay.
Now let's come back to the questions from David and Bash, and I think they're really for Dan, around has industry created the problem, and what kind of transparency are you going to provide around what is blocked under the different categories?
So, did we bring it on ourselves? Well, the first thing I would say is that the 4 ISPs agreed an approach, active choice. We agreed that approach in a self-regulatory code in 2011. Since then, we've had a great deal of shifting of goalposts to deal with through because of a variety of external pressures, none of which has been particularly helpful in each of the 4 businesses pursuing their particular technology solutions. At the point of agreeing the self-regulatory code, each of us had filters in the market. We were providing device-level filters. That was our chosen technology solution at the time. It wasn't as though we were divorcing ourselves as an ISP from responsibility for providing parents with access to filters free of charge, and we accepted at that point that it was right for us to give parents the choice as well. So the basic principles of ISPs having a role to play, supplying technology and supplying a choice, have been in place since 2011. The particular technical delivery of that responsibility, as I say, was subject to a great deal of shifting political debate in the past 2 years, and it probably, in our view, focused a little too much on what the right technological solution was above what the right policy objective was. I think all 4 ISPs have long been committed to the same policy objectives as government, but would have probably preferred freedom to approach that in different technological ways. Over the course of the past 18 months, the ground for technological freedom has shrunk quite considerably. I would also just pick up on Peter's point, is that we are moving faster than the vast majority of international comparators, and we shouldn't look at the UK as being a particularly slow mover on the provision of filtering services. I think we're largely leading the world on this stuff. So we could have probably gone a little quicker, but particularly us.
What about transparency?
In terms of transparency, the ability to provide, well, first of all, Virgin Media agrees with the principle of providing customers with transparency around what is being blocked, for what reason, and by whom. And that's a live consideration within Virgin Media. Providing customers with access to a breakdown of specific URLs is a hell of a lot of data to throw at customers, and probably not entirely interesting or useful to the vast majority of customers, and it's constantly changing on an hourly, minutely basis. So the practicalities of providing a full set of data, I would question, but the broad principle of transparency around what types of content we're filtering versus what types of content we are not, is absolutely something that Virgin Media thinks we should be transparent about. Equally, we think there's an argument for being transparent about sites that are open to debate or borderline judgment calls. And I would pick up on a word that Jeremy used earlier in the context of how we approach overblocking. For me, consistency is the key. We don't want to be in a situation, I don't think it'd be good for consumers to be in a situation where particular ISPs are making different judgment calls about particular types of borderline content. We think as much consistency around that as possible would be a good thing, and there's potentially an argument therefore for some kind of governance that's above that.
Okay, thank you very much. Did David, Abash, and Richard feel that their questions were answered? Do any of you want to follow up on those, or should we broaden down? Hold on, just wait for the mic.
Sorry, thank you. Just quickly, you mentioned that a lot of other countries are looking at the way the filtering is sort of perceived through the media in the UK. And I think that's quite an important point, is that I don't know about how you feel understanding how filtering works. I get very fed up reading some of the codswallop you read in some of the media.
Or even cock.
Yeah, I use that one. Especially, yeah. But I mean, there's articles, in the Guardian, things that are just absolutely fundamentally wrong in their reporting on how filtering works or what's happened. How do you think collectively as a group, so not just ISPs on their own, or not just necessarily Open Rights Group or any other group, how collectively can we work across the board to ensure that the media are actually reporting the correct thing, I suppose.
That is a very metaphysical question, and one that, frankly, I don't know any single organisation in the world that feels it's properly reported by the media, including media organisations. So if you talk to people in the BBC about how I used to work there, as some other people in this room, everybody feels they get misreported. So I think that's a pretty mega problem that even OfCOM couldn't solve, let alone Maria Miller.
You could block the news sites who are covering you inappropriately.
Okay, let's have some other contributions from the floor. So we've got Alex over there, and I'm hoping we can others will also. Frankly, you can say something because there's which is great. How often do you go to a conference where you get to raise your question, Alex?
Hi, it's Alex Burrows from Nominet. Sorry, David and I are doing a Nominet tag team on this, so apologies for that. Simon, you said something earlier about how does this scale up to a debate about the global governance of the internet, and I thought it was just worth circling back around to that question. I think one of the issues I think probably the consensus view amongst most of the countries who engage on this issue is forms of protection for children to, for instance, limit their exposure to extreme pornography or violent material actually is absolutely fine. There needs to be some checks and balances around that, but that's an appropriate form of intervention. I think where the rubber really hits the road in terms of potential cultural clashes and scope for fundamental disagreement is around things like children's access to material that, on one analysis, promotes alternative sexual lifestyles, on the other, provides information about sexual identity, which for children growing up in certain environments actually is a very, very powerful source of help and source of assistance to as it were, come to grips with their identity. And I just wonder whether there's any views that the panel has or any reflections on how, in taking filtering forward, we can make that distinction between material which is clearly about effectively selling sexualized imagery, for instance, for remuneration, and material which is about promoting access to and celebrating alternative lifestyles and identities, which, to my mind, is not something that we should be imposing a filter on, whether that's a decision of parents or certainly a decision of, say, actors or ISPs.
Thanks, Alex. Again, it'd be great if we could take a group of 3 comments for questions. So who else would like to make a contribution to the debate? Yeah, over here. We're going to keep you walking, Nora. Side to side. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anna Lucas and I'm from OfCOM. I have been to quite a few debates and talks on the issue of child internet safety recently.
Haven't we all?
Yes, many places. So I went to the Westminster eForum debate a couple of weeks ago, and Will, I went to the youth panel, the Safer Internet Day youth panel. And it's mainly on the topic of children and their voice. So Will, you mentioned that you often take children to events like this, so they have a say, and I just wondered how much, in terms of policy and building policy around this, you take into account the voices of children, because I think some really interesting stuff came out of the event a couple of days ago, and I was it was quite refreshing to hear what some of the children were saying, and they obviously have some really interesting suggestions, and I was just really interested how companies like Facebook engage on a regular basis with children and how much you take into account what they're actually saying, because obviously our research captures their attitudes and behaviour, but just where events like Safer Internet Day, where they go to next and what the next steps are, and how that's actually instilled in policy making.
And a great question. We go to lots of different events. I've never heard that question being asked before, so that's good. Let's see if can we have one more, then we've got a group of 3 questions or contributions. Susie. Thank you, Susie.
Susie Hargreaves, Internet Watch Foundation. It's not related to the other 2 questions.
It's all right.
Okay, so
just challenging my chairing.
Yeah, I know. You've got to find a way to segue. Yeah, so,
I'll do it.
But one of the things that I do feel strongly about coming to IGF events about child safety is that child safety sits completely separate to the main debate about internet governance. And actually, one of the things I think we do bring to the table is the multi-stakeholder approach. We show, okay, it might be low-hanging fruit to deal with child sexual abuse content on the internet because generally people all agree it's a very bad thing, but actually we do show how private sector, government, civil society can work really effectively. And I think there are huge lessons to be learned from the child safety arena. And the conversation we had earlier about we shouldn't just be talking to ourselves each time, and actually we have got a contribution to make to the bigger debate on governance issues. And I wondered what the panel thought about that.
I think thanks, Susie. So that question around how can we bring the lessons from the child safety arena that we feel, as it were, positive about. So some of the things we talk about have been somewhat negative, but in general, the mood is quite positive. How can we bring that to the wider internet governance community? I think that links to what Alex was also questioning. Having said that, I think I'm going to take Anna's question first and ask Will to give a view around, I suppose it'd be interesting to get your view, Will, about whether you think the organisation, so you bring the voice of children into things, do you think organisations like my own and others listen?
Okay, well, maybe I'll give a bit of background to the Safer Internet Day event where we invited policymakers to come and listen, and I was kind of trying to represent a David Dimbleby kind of role in a question time environment with 7 children and young people. Jonathan,
the younger, I think.
No, David Dimbleby. He was doing it as like question time.
I'm flattered you want me to the younger of the two. Dimbleby. It was fascinating. I learned an awful lot from that session too, where we had a variety of different things, and some of it was challenging for us as an organisation, and we are going over what these young people have said to think, well, the messages around how we want to be informed about e-safety, but don't scare us. And that was a very loud and clear from all the young people was we want to learn about it, but don't scare us off from using these services from which we want to be able to use. And there was some, even 14, 15-year-olds talking about sometimes they might be more apprehensive going to use particular services as a result of some of the stuff, not that I say heard from us, but heard in the kind of e-safety space, but also just from the media. So that was a big, powerful message. But there was also a very strong message is that we want to be creative online. We want to be creative. We want to be creative. And what's holding us back at the moment is the amount of schoolwork that we have to do. That was a really strong message from one of the young people. And then there was a sense of anticipation about, well, if we could combine the creativity in the curriculum in September, don't just stop holding us back. We want to go forward and be very creative. And I think that we want to go and take away what we've learned from that, but also we want everybody who was there to kind of draw from that. We'll share the video and write it up, and it'll be out there for people to see. But we carry that voice in the work that we do. That is part of the mission that we give ourselves, and so we work collaboratively with others. So we work with the on Facebook Safety Advisory Board, and we're able to input the issues that children, young people, and parents have around particular e-safety issues, whether it be the content side in kind of this discussion that we're having now, or the conduct side, or reporting, or privacy, or whatever it might be. We take the view that we need to be collaborative in this work, and I think for the ISPs, just on the collaboration point, I think that's a bit different to how it's worked in other countries around the world. That you have the 4 big ISPs working together to do something. We've tried to work with the 4 ISPs to try and show this is the parental controls, this is where you find them, this is how they work. So we kind of build that and put it on a plate for parents, because there's issues, the barriers that parents have been facing around controls is something we get in the sessions we run with parents. They say to us, well, I didn't know that was there, or I didn't know how to set it up. We want to try and make it as easy as possible. I think the choice that they're going to have to make is going to help remove the obstacle they didn't know these parental controls existed. But I think also carrying people through the process so they can understand it will be right. I'm getting off the point, but I think it's really important that we do have that young people's voice, and in fact, it's quite surprising. Often they're the most rational voices in the whole discussion. Just
add a thought to that. One of the things that I think disservice to young people in this whole debate is the kind of assumption that they are sponges walking around the digital world, absorbing all of the harm that's thrown at them with no self-resilience to be able to regulate their own behavior. We're very keen to understand the extent to which that's true and the extent to which children that engage in what we would call good self-regulatory behavior, how they come to form that kind of resilience. What experience have they had that's led them to that? Is it a case that actually the odd bump on the head in digital terms is no bad thing and actually creates an appreciation for where the boundaries are on the internet, and how do we help build children's resilience? Because, you know, as I said repeatedly, filters are an important part of this, but not a panacea. And ultimately, we need good parents, but also kids that know how to respond to harm in order to build an enriched and safe digital environment. So we're going to do some work to understand how that works.
Thanks very much. Do either Pete or Jeremy want to say anything about the voice of children before we move on to the bigger kind of internet governance topics? Jeremy?
No, we talked to a lot of children outside of our research, just to say that, and they're clearly a very important part of our understanding of the environment, just as we ask parents.
Okay. Thank you.
Just very quickly to say it seems like there is a lot of good work in that front, whether it's the stuff Will and Childnet are doing, or Andy Fippens on our advisory council. He does lots of great stuff talking to children. I guess the question is it being listened to in the right places? Does it have the right status in the debate? Is it helping us think about what issues we need to be addressing? So the good news is that there's some of it.
And I'll slightly abuse the chair because Anna, you did ask me about Facebook and the impact it has on us. I'd say the biggest thing I've seen in the last year as change on Facebook as a result of conversations with young people is how one element of our privacy settings work. So we changed two features of privacy for under 18s. One was that we made the initial experience a friends-only experience, but we also allowed under 18s to post publicly. And we did that because a lot of young people were saying, look, one of the reasons why I use a range of different services online is because actually I'm allowed to talk about things that I care about in a wider forum than this more restricted forum that Facebook imposes. We certainly don't require young people to post publicly. We never change their settings if they don't want them to, and we make sure we provide lots of education those first couple of times that a young person posts publicly. But we felt that was absolutely in response to what we're hearing from some young people about their experience of Facebook and why they were finding it in some ways less attractive in some aspects than some other services. Okay, let's go on to this wider topic around safety and internet governance. So Alex raised the issue around when safety starts moving beyond things that are kind of universally seen as harmful for children into areas which are much more contentious, particularly around sexual identity. And then also the issue that Susie raised around how can we ensure that some of the best features we see in terms of the multi-stakeholder approach to safety, and the IWF is a prime example of that. How can we surface that to the wider internet governance community? So I might ask Pete to kick off on this one, if that's all right.
Sure.
And to give us your perspectives on it, and we'll go around the group.
Well, both excellent questions. On the breadth of the categories question, I guess. It was always obvious that the filters were going to include more categories than just pornography. We knew that from the way that mobile phone networks had implemented filters, and we knew that because that's what all filtering services offer. So it was frustrating not to have the conversation up front about which categories would be included in ISP's products and which would be pre-ticked, but also frustrating not to talk about what those categories meant. I think we talked earlier about why it's beneficial to have this conversation in the UK, and one of the reasons is when you just import a list of categories from a provider potentially based in a different country, they're going to have a different way of thinking about sexual education or pornography even, or whatever, loads of the really contentious issues. And we saw that probably most clearly with the sort of problems with BT's initial implementation, where they had a fairly problematic sexual education category, albeit optional. I mean, in my opinion, those things aren't things that you should you should be allowing parents to stop their children from viewing, especially when you're talking about children over the ages where they should be learning about those things in responsible ways. I mean, if you're implementing filters that even accidentally have categories like information about respect for your partner or alternative sexualities, I mean, it's not helpful in terms of protecting children to put that in the gift of parents, I don't think. So partly, and this is a bit of a cop-out answer, the problem is we didn't have this conversation early enough, and it's not easy enough for parents to know what categories are available, and it's to date, I don't know if a version implementation is going to be better. The explanations of what categories really involve and who's made those decisions about what goes into those categories hasn't been clear enough at all. Because it's interesting to know who's making the decisions about what counts as sex education or what counts as harmful. You know, there's some really broad categories, and there's some quite strange combinations of content if you look at the descriptions, ranging from, in Orange, the most famous one was Orange's category, which included esoteric material, which has become a bit of a sort of a bit of a straw man. Yeah, well, yeah. To be fair, it was, when we wrote about this, it was part of their sects content, which is SECTS, which made more sense in the context of it having been from a French, probably a French translation from a French provider, but still, I mean, the very broad combinations of content and not thinking about that clearly enough will lead to people accidentally turning things on they shouldn't.
And just to follow up on Susie's point, would the Open Rights Group talk about the UK's approach to safety as an example of good internet governance?
I think it's too broad an issue. I mean, there are some good things and there are some bad things. I think, as you said, some of the areas where people work together really effectively and genuinely, it's an inclusive process. That's something to learn from. I think focusing, the question that comes out of all the problems is probably really clearly who is making a decision about what somebody can access online. And that's as much as it gets complicated and difficult to these issues. There's always a very simple question. Is somebody making a decision about what that person can look at and do online, and who is it, and why do they have that power? I think that's a really interesting, well, not interesting, it's very obvious. Really important question to just always go back to when you're thinking about these policy issues.
Thanks, Pete.
You just say a word. I'll just say a word about how we went about categorization of our child safe mode in our new product. We engaged with other charities and NGOs, Claire Perry, Helen Goodman, to help us define what the list of categories should be in that one-click child-safe mode. And apologies for not reaching out to the Open Rights Group. In hindsight, we certainly should have done, and I wish we had. Nonetheless, Will, you might remember the session. The 9 or 10 categories that we picked to go into the child-safe mode, they picked themselves, really. There were very few categories that were debatable about whether they should be absolutely filtered for under 18s if the parent wants to introduce filtering, versus options that are given to parents as a pick and mix that they can decide, things like social networking or gaming, that parents might legitimately not want their kids to access at certain times of the day or at all, but that there was no grounds for including in a one-click child-safe mode. And as I say, those decisions largely picked themselves. We did an afternoon on it, but there wasn't too much controversy. That said, and I return to the point I made earlier, there will be cases where things are miscategorized. We don't actually have a sex education category that will be presented to customers at any point. So hopefully we'll dodge that particular bullet, but there will be miscategorization, and so we have processes in place to deal with that. The main process we have in place were two main processes. Firstly, the judgment about what site goes into what category has a human interface where it's controversial. A person will make a judgment about the content of a controversial or borderline site. And secondly, we have the ability to whitelist sites that, through the overblocking process, are judged to be sites that should always be open to the public.
Dan, I'm very conscious you're not answering the question, which is, but maybe that's actually because, I mean, to be honest, we don't tend to think of we don't tend to think of the UK ISPs as actually playing a very big role in the broader internet governance.
Yep.
You're the only one here. Well, actually, Richard did as well, but not particularly looking at that broader internet governance issue. And so it's so if you don't mind, unless you've got something to say on that, I'm going to move on.
No, I'd like to say something on that. I mean, I think our broad position on internet governance is firstly that the work that CSE does and the IWF does is excellent, fantastic, but it's right that it is strictly limited to child abuse material. Ourselves as a business have taken a moral judgment effectively that child abuse material is so abhorrent that it should not be accessible on the internet, and therefore we disabuse ourselves of. Be careful what I say here, actually. We don't let legal constraints affect our approach to child abuse material, and I think it's accepted in the UK that the approach to child abuse material is separate and should be treated differently to other types of content. Where other types of harmful content come in, frankly, is a question for Parliament, and it's regrettable that so far Parliament hasn't had the opportunity to debate some of these issues, debate the effectiveness of blocking, first of all. You've got courts in Holland throwing out blocking orders against particular websites on the grounds that blocking is not an effective response. That's an interesting debate and one that should be further than the UK. But to ask ISPs to make a judgment about whether a particular type of adult content versus another type should be subject to blocking, for me, is the wrong form of governance. It's not a judgment for private companies. It's a judgment for Parliament and for government to make, and I'd welcome them taking that responsibility.
Thank you. So, Will and Jeremy, do you want to add anything on this wider issue of the safety agenda for internet governance?
As opposed to the Alex's other point. Yeah,
well, I'll give you Alex's question as well if you like, but that's what I meant.
Okay, I'll do I just want to stay on both. And then we're okay. Time and everybody's so adapted.
It's all right. They've got a treat coming.
Okay, you're done.
They've got a treat.
On the broader kind of internet governance, I think Dan's intervention is particularly relevant and salient. The things that would be least desirable, in my opinion, I don't know that I can really fully speak for OfCOM here, would be if the successful assumption of a role in delivering a family-friendly internet by the UK's ISPs was considered not as a useful innovation, but rather as an indicator that in thinking about internet governance, we should be looking to ISPs as a significant actor in mediating and controlling the accessibility of lawful, harmful, or unlawful services generally, because I think it's generally acknowledged through and it's kind of particularly cited in the net neutrality debate that it is ISP's lack of limited exercise of control over the content and services which are accessible to their consumers and which their consumers access that has actually underpinned some of the extraordinary kind of wonderful things that the internet has helped make available to society and has helped in terms of kind of economic as well as creative innovation. On Alex's particular point, and this again I think it is not dissimilar to some points we've been hearing, I think it's an unfortunate fact that an environment in which parents are entitled to choose what kinds of services are blocked is not an environment in which we can pick categories, even if categories which we're deeply uncomfortable about, support for alternative sexuality, particularly those who are kind of emerging and crystallising their sexuality. We can't choose that there are some things that are off the blocking agenda. It is going to be put in the hands of parents and to some extent in the hands of ISPs to offer those decisions to parents. The thing that's really, really critical, is that it isn't bodged up in esoteric, that it's made an explicit offer. But I think parents are entitled to that. In fact, they can write in their own site to be blocked. And that's true across a whole range of legitimate, indeed very important information resources to which children should have access.
Could I come back on that very, very quickly? I think
go on,
very quickly, just that last point. I think there are categories that that we wouldn't accept not being on that list. So there's probably a conversation to be had about categories that might not be best put on that list of possible options.
Yeah.
I would say, potentially.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, but I think it's really hard having devolved to industry that responsibility to then say, actually, no, we are going to make this a statutory frame and you're allowed to do that and not to do that.
Okay, thank you. Will, last word.
Last word. I was kind of listening to the question and listening to the answers, and my answers kind of spreading across all of that. So, I guess reflecting on what we've got, I think we've got a great model. Parents were saying they wanted something simple, and this has responded to that. We have all 4 ISPs offering the same thing, which makes it much easier for us when we're talking to parents directly, to try and explain what it is that is available to them. They're going to get this forced choice. They're going to make this choice, and our work has to be there to try and make sure that choice is a really informed and good one. The conversation about overblocking and underblocking, filters get a bad press because it's easy to bypass them, and also it blocks too much. You kind of attack them from both sides. I'm hoping that the focus that we have as this choice is coming in is try and make this work as best as we possibly can, to iron out the differences and, you know, the voices coming in from outside to try and help these things work better. I think we're going to see, hopefully, I'm always an optimist, over the next 12 months, much more nuance in relation to the filters that are going to be offered. And I think then we have to think about how do we talk about the filters to parents in relation to children of different ages. Are we talking to parents of primary school children with a much stronger line saying, here's filters, you need to turn them on because, and then we talk to parents of teens who say, well, you can turn down the volume a little bit and try and make it more nuanced. Are the filters going to keep pace with that, with the children of different ages amongst the families, about how to manage that, how to improve the technology so the profiles of different users are there? I think it's a policy in action, and then with OfCOM's measuring, perhaps at the end of the year, after all this has been put in place, we'll see, well, what impact has this policy had, and then we can really show on the international stage, this is the policy model we've taken up. I don't think we'll say success is 100% taken up. Success is all parents being informed to the point where they make a decision about what it is they want to do, rather than carrying on without the awareness of that decision. I think it's a really important time, and the fact that the ISPs are giving people the choice, our message is to parents, you can choose right now. Don't wait for that choice. Let's get out there and start encouraging people to do that, but let's try and inform people about what the decision is that they're making.
Thank you very much, Will. I promise you a treat. It's unusual for somebody from Facebook to chair a panel rather than to be speaking and to be subject to quite a lot of questions typically, as Anna will attest from the recent Westminster Forum. Obviously, you haven't had that opportunity, but I also haven't had an opportunity to talk about Facebook's approach to these issues. On Tuesday on Safer Internet Day, we released a very short film, which I hope you'll indulge me in watching now, which talks about Facebook's approach to safety. And our approach is all about conduct, and contact is not about content, typically. And there's a certain person on this panel, well, 2 people on this panel who star in the video. Nora, let's see how the technology works.
It's exciting and humbling to have so many people connecting and sharing on Facebook. And that's why we work so hard to help them keep safe. We're really serious about safety. We have a team of dedicated engineers, and we employ experts who work around the clock to help people keep safe. And we're always looking to innovate, to provide new tools and new advice to people so they can keep safe on Facebook.
I work in Dublin in Facebook's European headquarters, and my team is the safety team. And what we do is we basically look at reports from users across the globe. So whenever someone is worried about bullying or harassment, or if they see something on Facebook that they think is inappropriate, it's likely that it's going to come to my team here in Dublin. We've built very intelligent tools that help us prioritize reports. So we really want to make sure that we get to those important reports first. For example, if someone is at risk of harming themselves, we want to make sure that the team gets to it quicker. The Facebook safety team is a global team of experts. We're split across 4 different locations, and whatever the language, whatever the time zone, whatever the issue, we just want to make sure that we have the best person possible taking a look at all reports.
Well, safety was important from the very beginning of Facebook in 2004. We made a decision that everybody had to use their real name when they were on the platform. And actually that means that they surround themselves by people they know in the real world, their family and friends. And just as most of us behave respectfully in the real world, people do that on Facebook as well. One of the things we've learned as we've grown is that safety is a shared conversation. And that means working with partners who are experts in those kind of conversations in the real world, who can help us get our safety messages across.
InSafe is a European network set up by the European Commission in 2004. It comprises safer internet centres in 31 countries, and together they strive to ensure that young people can really get the best out of internet and know how to respond if things do go wrong. We've been working with Facebook for the past 4 or 5 years, and for us it's a very important partnership. Each of us bring our knowledge, our experience, our ideas, and together ensure that young people have the information they need to stay safe online.
We are experts in technology, but we partner with experts in other fields, like organisations that work in schools or academics who are expert in human relationships, so that together we can provide the best tools and the best advice for people to resolve problems if they come across them on Facebook.
Childnet's a children's charity, and we work in schools across the country. We work with young people from the age of 3 up until 18, and our mission is to try and equip them with the skills to be able to use the technology safely and responsibly. Our role with Facebook is that we're part of the Safety Advisory Board, and we are able to bring to the board the experience of children and young people and of teachers and of parents and carers directly to the heart of the organisation. We also run Safer Internet Day, and Facebook are an important partner in that. It's a great way of reaching more people with these important messages.
We're only just beginning to understand the ideas of human interaction or emotional intelligence online. Facebook is actually tackling these problems by putting together a teams of experts from renowned universities like Yale or Berkeley, trying to build these concepts and these ideas into the very platform. There's takedown procedures for certain pictures that might be disturbing or annoying to someone online. And this is allowing people to actually solve the problems or the conflicts that might take place online by themselves. And this is actually a way to make the platform more compassionate.
The digital environment is constantly changing, and we're not going to stop looking for even better ways to help people on our service. We're going to work with our partners, and we're always going to look to see how we can empower people to resolve problems if things go wrong on Facebook.
Okay, thank you for your indulgence. I hope you've enjoyed the panel, and I really appreciate it. I thought there were some great questions and some really good contributions from the panelists. So we've got a short break now, and then I'll endeavour to do my very best to sum up what we discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.